Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be doing something slightly different. Going to be trying out some matchup busters. Now, the concept of this video, or the series that I'm hoping this might become, is it's going to be really trying to get towards that player mindset of exploring testing and making the most out of your testing, because as great as uploading new deck analysis videos all the time can give you a very base knowledge, and with the matchups, hopefully some insight into the matchups that are demonstrated, I feel like that's very much the starting point. And I really want to start adding in some content where we're being more practical and giving you more tools of how to test effectively going from tournament to tournament. Now, for today's video specifically, we're going to be asking the question based on Rowan Stevenow's top 4 double colorless Mew build, where there were some really interesting tech inclusions of the double grabber item card from the 151 expansion, which is grabbing a Pokemon from hand and putting it to the bottom of the deck, as well as the Luxray V with the Fang Snipe attack, where you are discarding a trainer card from your opponent's hand. Now, this card is generally pretty good in the Mew deck because it gives you a going second attack immediately, which can be disruptive against a lot of decks, and Grabber is disruptive against possibly a lot of decks as well. So the Luxray, I feel like, is a pretty good inclusion, and I know that Rowan, is a junior world champion, a senior top 4 worlds finisher, and has done very well at regionals as a master. So very accomplished player. I'm sure has put the testing in as well with the card and gets value out of the card, and obviously had a great achievement. I'm not going to take anything away from that. But today I'm going to be really honing in on one crucial question for my own personal testing, and that's going to be, is the Grabber Luxray V package enough for me to feel confident into the Arven Charizard matchup? The reason why I'm asking this question myself is, firstly, looking at the data for Peoria, Charizard had a 19% meta share in that day 2, by far the most popular showing up archetype in the day 2 field, making me feel like even though it didn't get a top 8 placement, there were plenty in the top 16, plenty of good showings out there, and honestly, despite its popularity, also had a really good conversion rate. So I would expect Arven Zard to be sticking around in the next few regionals. So I'm going to ask myself, is it worth me playing DTE Mew if I can't beat Arven Zard? That's the first question that I'm trying to answer with this new deck list. The second question is, from the Arven Zard perspective, do I have to be worried about Grabber Luxray into the Mew matchup, where one of the key selling points of Charizard was that you're bullying Mew players, and now do these tech cards make a big enough difference where I actually have to be concerned about this matchup and maybe even look to add in, additional stadium cards, different supporter cards, that sort of thing, different engine Pokemon altogether, to respect a potential new way of playing Mew? So this is a really reductive question in that I'm figuring out exactly one matchup and figuring out how these techs work. Once again, I feel like Luxray, solid card, definitely going to be helpful against like Lugia, definitely going to be helpful against Gardevoir. I don't have any, and also helpful against Lost Zone box if you can just cherry pick crucial supporter cards or switch outs or discard synergy cards if it's Lugia, that sort of thing. It's going to be really effective, and DTE Mew doesn't have a good turn 1 going second attacker anyway. So I'm not saying like, is the deck list good? I'm literally just trying to ask the question, is it good enough into this one matchup? And that's exactly what Matchup Busters is going to be all about. I want this series to be different almost every time I do it, because I want it to be this exploration where I'm doing lots of different testing, and sometimes it will be very reductive like this, where I'm trying to answer one thing to cross things off my deck list in terms of if I'm taking it to a tournament, or make me feel more confident in a deck like Arven Zard. If it still feels okay into this new build of Mew, it's still probably going to be a safe deck going into the next few regional championships for my own personal testing. But that doesn't mean what I discover makes DTE Mew like a bad choice or anything like that. I'm just simply a kind of risk-averse player that doesn't want to simply take L's. That's why you won't see me playing Mew at the moment, because I'm worried about Charizard, or won't be seeing me playing like Rapid Strike box because I don't just want to flip over against a Lugia or against a Mew player and have a head slap moment and think, well, it's time for an early lunch. That's just not a feeling I want to have as a player. I want to feel in control and capable of winning every round I sit down against, so that I'm not just going through a matchup roulette. That's my own personal preference. There'll be players out there who have been very successful and will continue to be successful with those archetypes, and I take nothing against those players. But it's something for me where I am crossing off decks for my own personal choice going into tournaments. And that's why I'm asking this very reductive question. The first thing that I wanted to look at, after, of course, seeing this big top 8 placement, you know, we already know that net decking is definitely a very solid thing to be doing in the game right now. It's a very easy way to pole vault yourself into very playable deck lists, because we know these lists have had very solid results. But looking a little bit deeper into that result is always something that I will always try and do after tournaments. And PokerStats Live makes this very, very easy. If you haven't used this tool, definitely make sure you do it. It is literally PokerStats.live, and it's not just the pure regional championships. You can see previous events here. You can just lock on to all of these and have a look at those results. But drilling into exactly Rowan's tournament run, they went 14-3 overall, and their losses came to 2 Lost Zone builds. One was Turbo, one was Kyogre, and one of them was Charizard. They faced 2 Charizards both in day 1, actually faced none in day 2, which is quite fortuitous. But let's face it, to make into top 8, it's not just enough to be a good player. You also need to have had a good slice of fortune, whether it's matchups or whether it's just the way you draw your cards in the day. That's just inevitable. I think everyone who's had a good tournament will admit to that, at least in 1 or 2 points throughout the day, they've had the good slice of fortune. So take nothing away from the fact that Rowan had this result despite only playing 2 Charizards, and that is a big risk to that. But you can see in round 7 there was a win against Charizard. So I'm already skeptical of the effectiveness of a Luxray, because in 2 games it's gone 1-1. But I'm at least encouraged that there was a win being taken away from a Charizard player from the DTE Mew side of things, where I would expect it to be quite a difficult one, even with Judge Path at your disposal, so maybe this tech card makes it a little better. So let's jump into some gameplay. I'm going to be like ×3 speeding it and really going through this and not going into huge detail about the games itself that's going in front of you, but more so talk about my findings with this matchup busters that I did throughout the day. So as you can see here, I'm playing from the Arven Zard side of things, because I really want to figure out a couple of things. I think now that the Luxray is more known, can I play around it more differently as a Charizard player to give myself still a decent chance of getting into the game and playing around Path, Judge, Fang Snipe plays? Are there other Pokemon I can put into the active position? Are there like pre-attachments I can be doing? Are there other Pokemon I could be getting into the play? Like, for example, this Entei proactively into a Mew matchup. Typically, you don't want to leave multi-prizes scattered around your board, but because I'm expecting hand disruption combos coming in early, is it better for me to have, from the other side of this Judge, the option to Forest Seal Stone immediately and bounce back? So these are the things that I'm trying to like bear in mind as we go through the testing. But this was really me wanting to figure out, is Mew allowed to be played in the next set of tournaments, and how effective is this Luxray? So we're getting into some games now. I think the main sort of takeaways I had from this is that you definitely shouldn't write off how good Mysterious Tail Mew is for unlocking you from Path. You definitely shouldn't undervalue turn attachments as well. I think, obviously, your Charizard, you expect typically you're getting so much bonus energy in play typically, that turn attachments are kind of something you can forego throughout most games. As you can see there, I tried to Ultra Ball for Fish, then punt with Mysterious Tail to find the vacuum, but I didn't quite get over the line there. So this Fang Sniper is working out, and the opponent is starting to swing now with their Mew. Yeah, they're able to leap here. But sorry, I got caught up in what's actually in front of me. But be aware of the Call for Family attacks from the Pidgeys, the Blazing Disruptions from the Charmanders. All of these things can add up towards you having better outs from the top of the deck, or just draws in your hand here and there. And as you can see, I've manually attached towards an Entei here, and suddenly I'm putting on pressure for the opponents and making them have a response immediately here. Because otherwise this Mew is actually just going to get 2 shots. So it's making opponents think about more than just, you know, the hand disruption combos and this, that, and the other. But also it's really just one of those things of like, there's so much RNG in the TCG and like what you can draw and how you can sequence it. It's really hard to actually calculate the effectiveness of things like Luxray. So oftentimes, even with a small sample size, getting that sort of like 10 games in, 20 games in, it's dull, it's tedious, and, you know, it's not always as glamorous or as fun as just grinding games on ladder or having a variety of matchups and, you know, having more fun with it, we're really trying to do like that scientific method of, okay, let's run this enough times that we feel confident of how this should go in a general scenario, what the high rolls look like, what the low rolls look like, that sort of thing, so that you know what to expect when you're actually sat across from someone at the table who's, you know, competent and is going to be making the best plays against you, so that you're as prepared as possible. So that's really what this sort of exploration is all about with the testing, and I think that's something that is kind of lost with that content. Obviously, I'm kind of guilty of this myself because I'm doing these deck reviews and giving you that sort of baseline knowledge, but not really often giving players the tools or asking the right questions of what should be done. I try and be analytical when I'm talking about deck lists and how my testing has gone, but really not showing that testing method so much. It's not really like in the limelight, and I think that is something that can seriously improve your play. Just the method in which you're grinding games will have a profound impact on your success, I think, and it's something that I definitely back. And it steered me away from tech cards that I thought were great in theory. It steered me away, or like it steered me towards tech cards that may have surprise factor and be powerful for certain tournaments. It's put me off decks entirely just from grinding a couple matchups that may look okay on the percentages on paper or whatnot, but there are lines that one deck can make that aren't made by the general player base, which make things more difficult. Even just like simple questions of like, should I be going first, should I be going second, these sorts of things. So as you can see, we're jumping into another one now. The Mew's starting to get set up. But really it's not all about like what's going on in front of you. I think there will be different times when I'm doing matchup busters, and I do want to hear your thoughts down below about this series in general, and if you like the sort of like deeper dive into the actual testing of matchups and that sort of thing, because I'm definitely willing to go deep into detail about certain matchups, even if we are just jamming one matchup compared to like a round robin of this deck against a ton of different variety. And there will be situations where I want to be actively talking through lines of play and this, that, and the other. I think that's much easier to do on sort of open call testing sessions compared to just grinding games on a ladder, because we can talk sometimes with Jack or my other opponents or whatever, if we're like in a call together, why I'm going through these lines of play to make it as hard as possible for my opponents or put them in strange positions where they don't really want to be in. As we are seeing some more Fang Snipe action coming in here, where we've been path judged and the rare candy has had to go. Definitely in this testing, I remember not attaching a belt and thinking it was really wrong, actually. But that's neither here nor there, to be honest with you. But I do think it's really important, especially in this sort of exploration stage with matchups. It's really good to be openly communicating with your opponents in terms of like what you're looking for, what you're afraid of, what would be their best lines of play. Because if that's something that's communicated from both sides, it's going to mean that you have like the most valid and most helpful data if the opponent's making the best plays against you, which obviously makes sense, right? So just something I wanted to talk about, because, you know, closed deck lists taking like 5 mulligans because you just happen to have done that a bunch of times isn't always like the most representative data, and it could lead you to bias. I think one of the things that I've found very often is that playing in real life games compared to playing online gives me much more bias, because I feel you just have like more feeling behind games that are happening in person. They also take longer because you're having to do physical shuffles all over the time, and you're just naturally in more conversation compared to in online, where a lot of things are done automated for you. So it feels a lot different, I think. So also having that element of being strict with it. As you see, I have a really nice high roll of an Arven here, but that's really all it takes to completely swing the game. And even though it is a high roll, how many cards do I have in deck? Like 39 at the time, something like that. And only having like 7 outs. I think actually with no path, we had 8 outs, right? We had Fish, Ultra wasn't live because of my hand size, and then we had the 4 Arvens, the Research, and the Ionos. And if you count Research and Iono as only getting you like Charizard half the time, maybe it's even lower odds there, but sometimes it's a real feels bad for Mew. That's the awkward thing, right? The Charizard's so bulky that it's just so ugly for them. And I think in this instance, the hit points of the Charizard is going to be prohibitive as well. So it's not like it's game over here. I actually think in this instance, the Mew was the closest to winning. But I think it's just a whiff power tablet thing here. But I think after, like, they grabbed my hand, so they know my hand's dead. They know they don't have to hand disrupt me here. And if they were just able to take a knockout, and especially with a path, they'd be in pretty decent shape. It kind of depends on how many tablets they'd have to spend to go through this Charizard and whether or not Entei could stick around for a turn or two. That would be possibly one of the only things that was still hurting them at that stage, but yeah. I think it's, yeah, just 220, so still not enough to deal with this Entei, so I can just pay retreat, but yeah. Some interesting testing, certainly, for this matchup busters, where I thought the Luxray was going to be much more effective than it actually was, because it was very effective at hand locking me, but the Charizard needs so little to, like, pole vault itself back into such a powerful position, especially because the DTE Mew has such low damage cap, right? So things can just, like, completely snowball out of control as soon as a Zard EX hits the board. So for me, for the testing, the spoiler is that Charizard got over the line too often for me to feel comfortable playing DTE Mew myself. If you guys feel like Arven Zard is going to see less play because it didn't make top 8, or if any of the newer archetypes that have been doing well recently challenge Charizard enough that it's not going to be a problem, or if you feel like, Colorless Lugia did badly, so Tina's more safe, which then makes Arven Zard less safe, this, that, and the other, those sorts of things you can ask yourself. Maybe there's still a world where DTE Mew is going to do well. Plus, I think Luxray is actually better in other matchups than this one. But you can see, once again, Judge Arven going to the bottom. That does give me some headache here, but we're gonna just go for the Charmander. I feel like these sorts of attacks are so important. The Charmander and the Pidgey are both so helpful here, and I actually think Call for Family Pidgey is huge for this matchup, low-key, because it unlocks your fire energy of just being more live to make sure you don't just get a couple of your Charmanders knocked out quickly. The Call for Family would give you extra Charmander outs early on if you would just happen to lead it, so that's pretty big. In this case, the opponent is, like, continuing to Fang Snipe us down because they're still worried about some of the cards in our hand. We actually rip a Research here, which is pretty insane. It seems like it's really fortunate that we're just ripping all these supporters off the top, but that is basically just the thing, right? If you sit there, like, how many Fang Snipes would it have to be for them to feel safe versus how quickly should they just get into the action? And I think the honest answer is that you should Fang Snipe Judge straight away, and then after that, you should just be straight in with VMAX. Ideally, you're leaping, but because you have Luxray on board, you can't always do that leap, because it's like an unsafe leap if you're only leaving one Mew V on the board. But ideally, you're not leaving a 3-prize Pokemon in the active while you're doing these sorts of lines. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. But yeah, if you go for an early Fang Snipe and you catch your opponent on a bad enough hand, I think you basically just put yourself in that situation where you say, well, top decks beat me here, but if I take enough prizes while their hand is weak, especially if you are taking out certainly the Charmanders themselves, I think that's actually really important, and just put them on the clock as quickly as possible. As you can see, leaps are being thrown in here, but in this case there wasn't a path like follow-up, so it feels pretty okay. And from this hand I should be able to carve out a Candy Zard line. We actually do get Candy off that, so I can Forest Hill Stone for the other piece, and then I can Iono straight into that, and suddenly our opponent's in a ton of trouble. So yeah, I think I actually time out here because we're discussing that the game is basically over from this stage of the Charizard being in play, especially because the opponent played so many power tablets. So yeah, it's not always about fully concluding the game, it's talking out loud, discussing how the lines of play would go from that stage on in the game. And yes, there's definitely merit in some instances to play an entire game out, even from really disadvantageous positions, just to see, like, in endgame resource wars, that sort of thing. 'Cause it's not all about a prize race, obviously, winning in the TCG. So there are, in many situations, reasons to go the distance, but in other situations, it's really not. So I did also just want to shout out the Tabletop Limitless setup. You can see I have just 2 tabs open. I'm playing against myself in this instance. And you literally have to go onto limitlesstcg.com. There's a tools drop down, and there is Tabletop as an option there. And I think you'll notice that I do a quick search on Limitless, actually, as I was copy-pasting one of the highest placing Charizard lists, and it was actually playing double Celebrations Mew. That's what I was questioning, because I had one Mew in the prizes and was surprised to see one in my deck. But anyway, that's a really unimportant detail that I'm spending time talking about. But what I really like about Limitless Tabletop, a couple of things really. You can play against yourself, which means you can play at any time of the day as long as you're up to it, and it's going to be helpful to you. But also, you can do all sorts of things. You can take back plays, obviously, and discuss plays openly with people and think about different lines of play, this, that, and the other. It also means that, like, based on your competence with different decks, you can have different levels of play testing. Like, you may have friends who are very competent with certain decks and then untested with others, but if you're experienced enough with decks, or at least you can discuss and think through what they should be doing to put you in a difficult position, you can be giving yourself good testing, if that makes sense. So what I really like about Limitless is it's fast. You can play against yourself. You have so many take back options that you can think about all sorts of different lines. You can even see it on the screen there. I'm like putting Forest Stone on, then taking it back, then thinking about where I should be attaching this, that, and the other. And that's kind of just it's more permanent, obviously. On PCGL, you sort of live or die by the decisions you make, whereas on this you can be much more fluid about it, and it's much more of a process that you're sort of going through and figuring out how things are going. But yeah, also when you get the hotkeys down and you can make it much quicker for yourself, it's going to be fantastic. There is a decent amount of automation there. You can see there's like V-star powers, turn counters, that sort of thing. You can flip prize cards. You can have them face up at the start so that you don't have to do deck checks. So ultimately, you can just grind a huge number of games very quickly. And for this exact example, because I was looking at such a specific thing of like looking towards the opening turns of a matchup, I was able to literally just go reset, new game over and over again. And just within a night, I was able to come to my own conclusion about the Luxray and how effective it was into this matchup. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's Matchup Busters. Quite a different video to normal, but I did just want to sort of go into the weeds a little bit with playtesting, with the mentality around it when you are serious about trying to do well at tournaments, and how it can guide your decisions for techs or deck choice altogether. And it can really be make or break between how your deck comes together towards the end stages. With even just a couple of weeks before, you can still get so much information in because this game is constantly evolving. So let me know your thoughts on this type of video and what you would like to see from it in future, or do you just want to go back to me talking about deck lists and playing against all sorts, because I'm also happy to do that. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you for another video tomorrow. Cheers.